Okay, welcome back everyone. We are ready to start paper piecing. We will be sewing the Mugs quilt, and of that we are going to start with the Latte Mug Block. But let's move on to paper piecing. It's one of my favorite things. So I'm hoping I can show you how it's done, and I know it takes a lot of practice, so hoping that this video will be something that you'll be able to watch, rewind, and if I can give you some points, tricks along the way to help you out, that'd be great. So this is the mug that we're working on today. It is the latte mug, and we sew it on to paper. Yes, we really sew our fabric onto paper. This is regular copy paper. I ran it right through my printer, nothing special about it. What things you do need to do that are special: set your machine to a 1.5 stitch length. We want that to be a really nice tight stitch length because later we're going to peel this paper off. If you have those tight stitch length, you will be able to peel it off much easier. Some tools that you need to have is an iron. I have this little Oliso iron. We are going to be ironing all the time. Every time in between steps, we're going to be iron. So you do need to have an iron close to you, a dry iron, no steam. We don't want steam on the paper, especially if used in inkjet paper. We do not want ink to go on your fabric. So a dry iron, 1.5 inch stitch length, some roughly cut fabric scraps. I have my add a quarter ruler. These are actually add a quarter plus. There's two different sizes, the 6 and the 12. They both work great. I'll be using the 12 today because the latte has some longer, my 6-inch ruler will be a little short. So I will be using the 12-inch, add a quarter plus. And what this is, it has a lip on one side that'll help us create our 1/4-inch seam allowance. On the other side, it tapers down so we can fold. Tapers down to nothing so we can fold. I will also have I use the Fisker's Rotary Cutter and mat. I like the spin mat to help me trim the edges. Those are very helpful to have close to you. And pins. I like the flower head flat pins because we will be using the ruler a lot, and then it lays nice and flat over those pins. First of all, what I did is print off the pages from the pattern. Down in the corner, there is a 1-inch mark. You'll want to take a ruler and just measure that and make sure you print it out at 100%. Don't scale it. You want it to be, make sure that line is 1 inch so that your block comes out to be the correct size and fits into your quilt. So we have that, and I went ahead and I cut around the edges on the outside line. The first line, the inside line, is the seam allowance, or the seam line, and the second one is the 1/4-inch seam allowance. So you want to cut on the outside line with your paper scissors. Set that aside. When you look at quilt blocks, they are numbered A1, A2, A3. It's very important that we follow and put the fabrics down in that order. So A1 is the inside of the handle, and I will be attaching piece A2 to that. So I have gone ahead and roughly cut out some fabric for myself. I'm using I love this print. It's called Basically Hugs by P&B, and it is in the light gray. You can barely see it, and I'm sure you can't see it on the camera, but it has a nice light gray texture to it. But what I want to do is we hold up to the light a lot. You can use a light table, a window, or a light works just fine. I want the wrong side of my fabric to the wrong side of the paper. And I'm placing it, when I look at the light, my piece of fabric that I have on the back is covering up the A1 spot here, okay? So wrong side of the fabric to the wrong side of your paper. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pin that down right in the center. You can also use a glue stick for this part, but I prefer the pins. So I have my fabric pinned to that. The next step is we're gonna draw a line we're gonna sew on the line between A1 and A2. So this little line right here. So the next step is we're going to create our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you do that with your add 1/4 ruler with the tapered edge. You're simply going to place it on that line that you're going to sew on and fold it back. And then you're going to lay the edge with the little lip down and use your rotary cutter to cut that off. If you don't have one of these, what would you do? You can use like a piece of cardboard or a credit card or something that would just be a thin postcard-like material, and use that to help you fold over. And you can use a standard ruler measuring out your 1/4 inch seam. All right, so now we know where our seam allowance is. So the part of my handle is going to be blue. I have roughly cut that out. Fabrics, we always want to place them right sides together. So I'm going to take my bright side of my background fabric and place the blue right next to that. You can pin it if you want to. Don't have to, just make sure your pin stays out of the way so we're not sewing over it. Never sew over your pins. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew on that line. And I am back stitching at the beginning. And I'm back stitching at the beginning and the end. That's very important because later when we take off the paper, when we're peeling it off, we want to make sure we're not peeling out our stitches. So after I've sewn that on, we sew on the design side of the paper. We're gonna press it. I'm gonna take out both of my pins now. So we iron right on our paper. And it's really important not to skip ironing every time because we do not want our fabric to gap later. We don't want to have little pockets of extra fabric. Okay, we're going to repeat those steps over and over. So let's do it again. I'm going to sew in between 1 and 3 now. We're adding on piece 3, so we're going to sew on the line that would add on piece 3. So first we fold. Then we cut the seam allowance, trim that off, and then we add on our new fabric right sides together. And then we're going to take it over the machine and sew on that line. And press. And I'll just show you, I just sewed from here to here, from where the lines meet. Now we will add on number 4, which is the long part of the handle. So again, we will fold it, create our 1/4 inch. So fold, cut, add fabrics with right sides together, and sew. And press over and over, those steps over and over. Now we go on to, we're going to add on 5, 6, 7 in that order. The next part that I'm going to do is just trim off some of these edges. My favorite part, cleans it all up and makes it look good. And I use the 1/4 inch ruler and just measure along the outside of the edge. Make sure you're using the side with the little lip on it here. Don't cut on the tapered side. It will just ruin your blade and your ruler. You've been warned. Okay, so now I'm on to piece 10, which is the big part of the mug. And I have a print from Kim from Ruby Star Society, and this is from her Liana collection. So we're going to repeat those steps again. We fold the paper, make our seam allowance, cut off the extra, and we're going to add our new fabric. And a little tip to you when you're starting out here, I know a lot of people say that paper piecing is wasting fabric, and I know there are scraps, but when you're starting out, I really advise you to use a bigger piece of fabric than you need and trim off, because it takes a little bit just to get the hang of it, and you're using a 1.5 stitch length. It's not fun to rip out. So just give yourself a little bit, as you're learning, give yourself a little bit more fabric. And then this one, I just wanted to show you that I did sew all the way through the seam allowance down there. I started actually off of the fabric and then up to the line there. So next step is to press. And then we will move on to piece 11, which is over here, some background fabric. If you feel that this piece is pretty big and it might get loose on you, go ahead and throw in a pin or two to keep it from wiggling around. That helps. That's where these nice flat pins are nice, because your ruler can go right over them. So fold back again, just like we did before, and create the 1/4 inch seam allowance. My fabric is pretty big here. I'll keep that though. All right. And then we will line up our extra background piece. And sew one more time. I want to show you something that I did there. I sewed off the edge of the fabric here all the way up the line, and then I just kept going. And I will show you in the next step. Let me follow and what to do with that, because the sewing was in our next seam that we need. But I'm going to trim off this extra because I want to use that big piece of scrap for my next step. So on the next step, we're going to fold, but I have seam lines. That's okay, just go ahead and rip those. Not a problem, we're just ripping the paper off of the fabric. It's perfectly fine to do. Flip it over, create my 1/4 inch seam allowance, save those treasured scraps there. And then I'm gonna add on, with right sides together, the top piece. So then to finish this block off, I would just trim around the edges, and then to finish this block off, I'd trim around the edges. This one is already all trimmed, and then what you do is just take and rip off this extra paper. At this step, I would, once the block is complete, just rip off all of that in your block is ready to add to your quilt. So there is paper piecing. Join us again on our next video, and we will be paper piecing the other mug. We have one more left. Thanks for joining us. I hope you guys are having a great time sewing your mug quilt.